We're live on the World Wide Web. So, I preach a sermon, and maybe on a Wednesday evening, as David earlier, on a Wednesday evening, get like maybe 13 people. Sunday, maybe get 30. My son takes 1 2-minute drone video and gets like 2,000 hits, and so that sort of put me in my place, huh? Now I'm glad we can use that for folks that can't get out or can't make it tonight. I do want them to know that we added Marie Watts back to our prayer list, and we are now praying for the Debbie Love family and the Sharon Creighton family. And we also took Susan Brooks off our prayer list because she's doing so well, but you can still pray for her. And I wanted to make a mention for everybody here and anybody online. I don't know if we'll have any announcements in the bulletin after this coming Sunday, because it's like everything is on the 19th. But a couple things here coming up. That we have a men's breakfast this Sunday morning, not Saturday, this Sunday morning at 8:30, obviously over in the fellowship hall, men's breakfast. And we're also going to be showing some information about outdoorsmen's ministry that we're considering. So if you or any guys are really into like hunting and fishing and other outdoorsman type activities, really encourage you to be there. Also, after service, we have a call business meeting, and the way we're gonna work it is there's gonna be a ballot vote for the 2 motions we're gonna make, and then we'll take them, and you can vote, and then you can hang out and wait and hear the result, or you can just go to lunch and get the phone message. So I think that's probably going to be the way that we're going to do that. So that'll be after service on Sunday. And also this Sunday, our OCC boxes are due back. So we'll total up our number. Even though if you want to do one electronically, please let Patty know so we can count that along with our numbers. And there's also a Women on Mission meeting afterwards. And next Wednesday, no service. Next Wednesday because of Thanksgiving. So keep that in mind. So, and then the 18th is kind of a big day, right, Elizabeth? You all ready for that? You sure you want to do this? Are you sure? She went, let me tell you, that's not the last time you get that look. That is not the last time. So we're excited for you guys as well. Is there any announcements I missed? I did want to tell you too, if you show up, we're going to start relocking the doors. Now we kind of got away from that when we sort of had, starting the preaching service at 7, but you can't be too safe in the world these days. So we're going to start, Tammy's going to start locking the front door. She's going to go around at about 7:05, since we have people showing up at 7. So if you show up and the door's locked, just knock. All right. And they can see you on the screen over there. And they can also, Tammy's got like super hearing, right? We're not going to put Ruby on that job. That's for sure. So, you're like, Ruby, you want to get the door? What? So, just let you know, see if you show up and it's locked, we're not trying to keep you out. We're just trying to keep bad characters out. So, if you would, please turn to 2 Samuel chapter 20. And as you do that, I want to also ask you to put your finger or your ribbon or a piece of paper and also have 2 Samuel chapter 8, starting at verse 15. I hope I have the right one here. I have to run. I get the wrong there. I might have the wrong reference on there. That's not going to be any good. I'm about to have to run to my office. Y'all going to have to talk amongst yourselves if I can't get this right. Oh, I know what it is. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. 2 Samuel chapter 8. I want to make a note of this first. So if you look at 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 15, it says, remember, we're going back in time now as far as our progress in the biblical account goes. So David reigned over all Israel, and David administered judgment and justice to all his people. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Zadok, the son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, were the priests. Seraiah was the scribe. Benaiah was the son of Jehoiada, was both over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. And David's sons were chief ministers. All right. Now you get that description, and I give this to you for a reason, but notice that it's introduced with the phrase, David reigned over all Israel, and David administered judgment and justice to all his people. Now, we know that David then is forerunner of Christ. All right, he's in typology. He's a type of Christ here. He is that Christ figure for Israel, but he is not the ultimate fulfillment of the promise. Okay, he's just a type. He's just a forerunner. But imagine if we took verse 15 there and we said, and Jesus reigned over all and administered judgment and justice to all people. And we would say that makes sense. All right, judgment and justice would be coming from Jesus, and he would reign over all. So what you get there is you get this description of this very stable reign of David. The problem is that on these pages in between, David's human nature came out a lot. And so the promised kingdom, David's promised kingdom, is not fulfilled really in David. It is ultimately fulfilled in Christ. Because David, because of his humanity, because of his sinful nature, he could not keep this up. And so what you get is you get a different description than when you look in chapter 20. We get to the end of chapter 20, and you see how it's mostly the same. It's a different tone, and I'll even tell you some nuances here when we get to the end. But also, it doesn't have reigned in judgment and justice. It doesn't have that introduction. It just says in verse 23 of chapter 20, and Joab was over all the army of Israel, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Adoram was in charge of the revenue. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Sheba was scribe. Zadok and Abiathar were the priests. And Ira, the Jerahite, was a chief minister under David. You get the same type of list, but why are you getting it? What's changed? And why is there this different tone to it? See, the reality is the description you get at the end of chapter 8 is one of stability. But what happened from that stability is instability came in. And that's why you get this title we have today, Instability. And that's where the nation of Israel, including Judah in that, even though there's already that division forming, the nation of Israel, David's kingdom, finds itself at a place of instability. And as we look at this, we're going to read through it, and then we're realizing that what we see here is organizational instability. The thing is, for us as God's people, really in any organization as Christians, but also especially as the church, see, we struggle against the same thing as David because we're trying to have a perfect picture of stability because we are Christ followers, but yet our sinful nature constantly comes in. I mean, does the God's people as a people, to the church, do we ever cause problems amongst each other? Do we ever have problems? Yes, we do. Well, if we did everything perfect, then we wouldn't. But we do. Just like David, he went from stability to instability. And that's where we find ourselves in chapter 20. Realize he's just overthrown a rebellion against his son who had rose up against him. And now he is dealing with, we looked last week at, as the return of the king, as he should be received. We see that there's actually a lot of problems. And we'll pick up at verse 43 of chapter 19, where it says, and the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 shares in the king. That means there are 10 tribes. All right. Therefore, we have more right to David than you being Judah. Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to advise bringing back our king? Yet the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. Then chapter 20, where we pick up from last week. And there happened to be there a rebel whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite. And he blew a trumpet, and he said, we have no share in David, nor do we have inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. So every man of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah, from the Jordan as far as Jerusalem, remained loyal to their king. Now David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house, and put them in seclusion and supported them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up to the day of their death, living in widowhood. And the king said to Amasa, assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days, and be present here yourself. So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the set time which David had appointed him. And David said to Abishai, now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he find for himself fortified cities and escape us. So Joab's men and the Cherethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men went out after him. And they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. When they were at the large stone which is in Gibeon, Amasa came before them. Now Joab was dressed in battle armor, and on it was a belt with a sword fastened in its sheath at his hips. And as he was going forward, it fell out. And then Joab said to Amasa, are you in health, my brother? Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not notice the sword that was in Joab's hand. And he struck him with it in the stomach, and his entrails poured out on the ground. And he did not strike him again. Thus he died. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. And meanwhile, one of Joab's men stood over Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, follow Joab. But Amasa wallowed in his blood in the middle of the highway. When the man saw that all the people stood still, he moved Amasa from the highway to the field and threw a garment over him. Then he saw that everyone who came upon him halted. When he was removed from the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. And he went through all the tribes of Israel to Abel and Beth-makkah and all the Berites. So they were gathered together and also went after Sheba. Then they came and besieged him in Abel of Beth-makkah. And they cast up a siege mound against the city, and it stood by the rampart. And all the people who were with Joab battered the wall to throw it down. Then a wise woman cried out from the city, here, here, please tell Joab, come nearby that I may speak with you. Then when he had come near to her, the woman said, are you Joab? He answered, I am. Then she said to him, hear the words of your maidservant. And he answered, I am listening. So she spoke, saying, they used to talk in former times, saying, they shall surely seek guidance at Abel, and so they would end disputes. I am among the peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city and a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? And Joab answered and said, far be it from me that I should swallow up or destroy. That is not so, but a man from the mountains of Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri, by name, has raised his hand against the king, against David. Deliver him only, and I will depart from the city. So the woman said to Joab, watch, his head will be thrown to you over the wall. And then the woman, in her wisdom, went to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. And then he blew a trumpet, and they withdrew from the city, every man to his tent. So Joab returned to the king at Jerusalem. The very unstable situation in which the nation of Israel finds itself, and I'll submit to you that even when you get to the end of this, where at the beginning of the chapter, he blew a trumpet, one man blew a trumpet, calling to battle, and at the other end of the chapter, another man blows a trumpet to show the end of the battle, that they still, though, are in a place of instability, not as much instability as they start the chapter, but nevertheless, there's still problems for Israel. In fact, the problems that they have will also, even after David's death, many of them will still be around. Solomon will inherit them, and then eventually they will even, all the way to the division of the kingdom. We pick up I want to share with you some characteristics of organizational instability as we see it here. One of the things that characterize organizational instability, and by the way, you'll see these things in your private lives as well and in your families, but we are looking at an organization here, an organism, the people of God. We can relate a lot of this to the church, but once again, it can relate with any organization, it can relate with any family group, and it can relate down to our individual lives. One of the things that you see is significant, especially sustained division. Significant, sustained division. There's always going to be division. People will always have different views, different opinion, different approach. There will always be division. But one thing you don't want is significant division, right? And one thing you certainly don't want is sustained division. And sustained, significant division is obviously very much a program of instability. We see in verse 43, this division is present between the 10 shares, the 10 northern kingdoms, the 2 southern kingdoms. They already have this division among themselves. It's what leads to this rebellion. You'll notice in verse 33, it says, we have 10 shares in the king. Then you'll look in verse 1, where there's the inset, the indentation of what Sheba says. He says, we have no share in David. And he's saying if we don't have 10 shares, we don't have 1 share in David. He said, basically, we have nothing to do with David. We are leaving. This will be the same division. It's not solved here. It's the same division that Solomon inherits. This is the same division that ends up resulting later on in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and separate kings and wars and rumors of wars and everything else that you get. They have significant division here. And then where there is significant and sustained division, it says out of that comes somebody, number 2, sowing discontent. Sowing discontent. Where there is significant or sustained or both division is going to be an environment that is ripe for sowing discontent. So in the midst of this, it says there happened to be a rebel. All right. I call him Sheba because I don't feel like saying Sheba, right? Because we always say Sheba as kind of a female name. So Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite, and he rises up. By the way, where it says rebel there, some of you probably might have something different in your translations. Anybody have anything different than rebel? There in verse 1, there happened to be a rebel. Troublemaker. Anything else? The actual phrase there is a son of Belial. All right, Belial being sort of a devil reference. All right, a reference to wickedness, a reference to death, a reference to rebellion. That when it says that someone is a son of Belial, is telling you they are the worst of the worst. So that's what in some translations I think say a worthless man. You have different things there. A son of Belial, a rebel would be kind of it's not really as strong as the Hebrew phrase is there for what they're meaning. But this is somebody a wicked person who takes a wicked situation and uses it as an opportunity to sow further discontent. So he becomes then this catalyst. He speaks up, he speaks out, and a rebellion happens. And you get by verse 2, you see, so every man of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah from the Jordan as far as Jerusalem remained loyal to their king. It's like, well, we just got done with this with Absalom, right? And now it's happening again. Because there was this significant sustained division, as a ripe environment for somebody to sow then discontent. And this is the person for it. These are characteristics then of organizational instability. Also, and if you've been following along with the story, you kind of recognize the 10 concubines or the 10 women that David that mentioned in verse 3. But we also see in this environment of instability we're going to call it number 3, secreted distress. Secreted distress. This is distress. All right. What's the key part of distress? Stress, right? Stress and strain that is because of sin. And what ends up happening is it doesn't get dealt with. It just gets pushed under the proverbial rug, right? It just gets pushed down. And in unstable families, in unstable churches, unstable organizations, unstable relationships, there is hurt there. Okay, there is hurt, there is pain that didn't get dealt with. It just got pushed down. It just got pushed down. And that's what's happened right here. If you'll remember, we can think about in chapter, you don't have to turn there, in chapter 15, verse 16, in the rebellion of Absalom. I'll read for you. It said that the king went out with all his household after him, but the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. So he left back part of his harem, these 10 concubines. Well, then, just a chapter later, in chapter 16, verses 21 and 22, we hear that Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father. Then the hands of all who are with you will be strong." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. So these are those concubines. So now David, and there's dispute on this. Does David realize his sin in even having this harem and having these concubines, and that he shouldn't have even had him? And what happened is a judgment of the Lord upon him? I don't think so. I don't think he admits his sin here. That's not the angle that I take. I think that he's heard about it, and he doesn't want. He's hurt by what Absalom did. He doesn't want to go back into these women, but he also doesn't want to throw them out on the street. So what he does is, it says right here, he took them who he left in the house. He put them in seclusion. He supported them, but he did not go into them. So they were shut up to that day of their death, living in widowhood. And so what this is this sin. There's sin all over that, isn't there? I mean, there's sin from David to Absalom to just the whole thing is sinful. The whole, just make you want to wash your hands or something. It's just dirty. It's sinful. But what happens is that it just gets pushed down. And so what you see in the midst of this instability, and why are we told that? Why are we given that point there? I mean, you can go along with the story and not tell us that. How big was that to the picture? What it's telling us is that within this environment, there is secreted distress. All right, there is hurt that is down underneath that is not getting dealt with. And you notice something about David? He had a tendency to do this, doesn't he? He had a tendency to not deal with things. He had some sons that did some terrible things. He didn't deal with it. He ignored it. He hoped it would go away. And what would always happen? It would always be there. It's going to do two things. It's either going to be down there, it's going to fester, or it's actually going to, cause a sickness to come up to the surface. And so we see now this instability that he finds himself in. There's division, there's discontent, there's distress. And then as we switch, what we start to see, I'm going to pick this apart a little closer for you, is number 4. I'll just, in keeping with this alliteration, we have selfish directors. We have selfish directors. I was like self-aggrandizing, self-centered, just people who were directors, who were leaders, who were people in positions of leadership that could have led well, but were really more thinking about themselves than they were thinking about the people or thinking even about the king in which they serve. And we see a process right here, and it's a lot of verses, so we're not going to go back and read all through them. But we see first in verse 4 that the king turns to, when he hears about this rebellion, he turns to Amasa. Now you remember that Amasa was Absalom took over the army, and he kicked Joab out, and he put Amasa in there. Then, even with some of Joab's help, David ends up winning but he still wants, in an effort of appeasement, I believe that's what was at the heart of that. In an effort to appease everybody, he puts Amasa at the head of the army and tells Joab to step aside. And that, once again, that attitude of appeasement, that secreted distress that's under the surface is now going to penetrate this leader situation here. So he turns to Amasa, and I want to go ahead and identify an aspect of the leaders that we see here. What we see in Amasa, and we'll see it in the next guy too, is incompetence. That's letter A there. Selfish directors who are just incompetent. We see incompetence here. They're aspiring to rise up in the ranks. They want to be in control, but they're really incompetent. Why is he there if he's incompetent? He's there because David is seeking to appease these other parties. And in an effort to appeasement, he put Joab, who, to tell you the truth, Joab is a more able leader than Amasa. Amasa hadn't won anything. I mean, he was on the losing end of the rebellion against David. David puts him in power. So David expects he's going to step up and do something right, but he's incompetent. Listen to what happens. He says to Amasa in verse 4, assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days and be present here yourself. So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the set time which David had appointed him. So he's incompetent. He can't do the job. In unstable organizations, you will see incompetent leaders whose competence is, in many respects, if they are incompetent, the level of competence they have is to just try to keep their head above water. It's just try to do enough to not lose their position. This guy's trying to do enough not to lose his position, but David quickly realizes, and so David says to Abishai in verse 6, he says, now Sheba the son of Bichri will do to us more harm than Absalom, to take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he find for himself fortified cities and escape us. I'm also going to lump Abishai in with incompetence, but now that I think about it, I could have added a letter, is weakness. He's really a weak leader, because the first thing that he does is he goes and gets his brother. Know who his brother is? Joab. Joab's his brother. He's waiting in the wings. Got a lot of distress under there. Got a lot of anger issues at David for what's going on. He got kicked to the side. You see that as soon as you go into verse 7, that what he told Abishai, you see, so, verse 7, Joab's men with the Cherethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men went out after them. And they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba the son of Bichri. So when he goes and he rounds them up, he also goes and he gets his brother. Joab's men gets thrown in with the Cherethites and the Pelethites. That's who Abishai was supposed to be leading. But he also goes and he gets Joab. And all of a sudden now, because you had incompetent, weak leaders, now they bring in what really, I'm going to give you letter B, is a savage leader. You get savagery. Now, I would say on a church level, this ends up being leaders who end up doing more harm than good. Leaders who leave a lot of hurt in their wake. But on this level, you're talking about people swinging swords. You're talking about military leaders. When you start to go up to, the level of leading armies in this sense, you really get where you get some savagery. People who should not be in power, who will use their own savagery in order to attain or to keep power. And we see what he does, and I'm not going to reread it here, but you see what he does to Amasa, right, who had taken his job. And he tricks him. By the way, this is the same thing he did to Abner. I don't know if y'all remember back to that. Like maybe back in your mind, like, had this guy done this before? He pretty much did the same thing to Abner before this. Stabbed him in the gut. Got up real close to him. Stabbed him in the gut. All right. He's a savage person. And he shouldn't be in power, but he is. I don't think he was always this way. It seems like he progressively got this way. So we see his savagery, and we see that in the end what happened is said, then Joab, he struck him in the stomach. His entrails poured out on the ground, and he did not strike him again, and thus he died. And so we get these selfish directors, maybe incompetent and weak and savage, But what competence and strength and smarts they do have is all about themselves being in power. Also, with selfish directors, you'll get letter C. I guess it could have been D, manipulation. Manipulation. So then you get to verse 11. So Joab's men now stood near Amasa, and then meanwhile, one of Joab's men stood there. We don't actually get his name, but he comes up and he said he realized, all right, everybody now doesn't know what to do. They don't know who to follow. So he gets up and he says, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, follow Joab. So he's basically saying, if you are for Joab, you're for David. And if you are for David, then you're for Joab. So go march now. And they're all like, okay, I guess we should go. But they still see who was their commander lying right here, gutted in the middle of the street. So what the guy's doing is he's seeking to manipulate these other men. So what they do is they just say, all right, so they drag his body over to the side of the highway. They cover him up. And they seek to manipulate the whole situation. Then now somehow following, if you want to follow David, if you want to fight for David, now you got to follow Joab. And so what he does is manipulates his whole situation. And we see then verse 13, when he was removed from the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. And he went through all the tribes of Israel to Abel and Beth-makkah and all the Berites. So they were gathered together, and they also went after Sheba. So what I've given you in all that big segment right there is to look at the emergence of really, in a sense, three leaders, but then you also get the one leader who's seeing this as an opportunity. Well, I better step up, and I'm going to manipulate this situation, and I'm going to aggrandize myself to Joab in his situation. And so it's all about in all that, from Amasa to Abishai to Joab to the man that's part of Joab's leadership corps. They're all just doing whatever they can do to have power. And at no point is it really about the king. Is it really about the people of Israel? And is it really about the stability of the kingdom? But they are actually just directors that are just showing the instability. And we can say directors, you can say leaders. As for that, the last thing I want to mention before we get to the last point is this: in the midst of all this instability, a wise voice comes in, and that is the wise woman in Abel. And what she basically does is, in the midst of all this instability, because what's Joab going to do? He's going to end up wiping out a whole city. And the little city states that are around that, there's going to be a whole bunch of killing, a whole bunch of more instability. And a wise voice comes into the situation. And I know it sounds weird for us that cutting off somebody's head and throwing it over the rampart was a wise decision at the time. But in the midst of this was the wise thing to do. It calls her, it just doesn't even name it. It says verse 16, then a wise woman cried out from the city. And what she does in the midst of all this instability is she interjects herself into the middle of it. And she brings some stability to this situation. And out of that, they get back to a more stable place. And you get to then, we get to verse 22. Then the woman in her wisdom went to all the people. They cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, threw it out to Joab. And he blows the trumpet. They withdrew to the city, and from the city every man to his tent. And so Joab returned to the king at Jerusalem. And ultimate chaos averted. Another rebellion put down. But you notice when you get this description of then where they were at, it's not the same as where they were at before. You don't get that introduction that you got back in chapter 8, right? How David reigned over all and administered judgment and justice. All you get, the description is such, and Joab was over all the army, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. And when you get this description, remember before, Joab was over all the army. All right, you had unity there. Now you've got division within the army. Now you've got this commander over part over here. You got this commander over these couple groups over here. So you've got division within the army. There's still that vein of discontent there. Also, by the way, when it says Adoram, verse 24, was in charge of the revenue, does anybody have anything besides revenue there? Says what? Tribute. All right, that's good. Anything else? Yeah, I don't really get the translators here. He should be, he was in charge of the forced labor. He was in charge of all the people that they had now conscripted through all this fighting and put then into forced labor. And by the way, this was then something you don't see at all in the other list. And now all of a sudden this is here. Yeah, it was revenue. It was slave labor is what it was. And this is forced labor that actually by the time in which the northern and the southern kingdoms end up splitting, this forced labor had grown to the point where it was even including now Israelites in that forced labor group. And so you see that you're starting to see justice. Where's the justice in slave labor coming out? So you see that within there as well. And then you see the description of the recorder and the scribe and the priests. But it is interesting as well that Ira the Jairite was a chief minister under David. And if you trace him back, what you end up finding out is that he's not even a Levite. And so it's like there's even some division within the priest that he's using here. There's this use of forced labor. There's division within the army. There's not that introduction. And so what I want to share with you, last point, number 5, is characteristics of organizational instability is significant diminishment. That the nation that we find at the end of chapter 20 is, it's more stable than it was at the beginning of chapter 20, but it's not nearly the stable organism, the stable nation that it was back in 8. What came in the middle? One thing. Sin came in the middle. Sin comes in the middle, and where there's sin, you will get that steady degradation. Part of the reason that I give you that list, though, is because, when you're living your life, you're in the middle of things. Sometimes you can't see them, right? You can't see the bigger picture because you might be right there in the middle of it. But if you can see the symptoms of something, if you can look at the symptoms of something, you might be able to say, I recognize that. That's some instability that you see right here. And I'll close in prayer with this. But you take, for instance, a family where it just seemed like there's always division within that family. And you'll be like, yeah, that's a sign of instability right there. You might maybe take a family. I'm just kind of putting on a family so I don't all make this about church. But you take a family and there's undealt with hurt underneath the surface. That's a symptom of instability. And what we get with Jesus Christ in eternity is stability. All right. I know that maybe doesn't seem like as grandiose a word as people think, but what's getting given to us a picture in chapter 8 is a picture of heaven on earth, a picture of the stability that every group and every nation and every peoples is searching for in this world. But we keep getting instability. Do you notice how much instability is in the world today? Do you notice how many things on this list you're like, yeah, that's in the news. That's there. And what do we do about it? Well, one of the things we make sure we do about it is in our sort of, influence of the world to make sure that we're doing the best we can, to live according to God's word and to have that kind of stability and avoid these kind of things that we see right here. Let's close with a word of prayer. Lord, we know that a big part of us studying the people of Israel is that they were your people like we're your people in the church, and that they were following a perfect God with a perfect plan, and they were also imperfect in their nature, and we are the same way. And so we know a big part of it is us learning from their successes, but maybe even more from their mistakes. Just like in our own lives, we learn more from our mistakes than we learn from our successes. So help us, Lord, to formulate stable organizations, stable families, stable churches, whatever we're part of, that we bring stability into that, because we are wary of the characteristics of instability in anything that we do. We pray, Lord, for a church too, because we want to be and continue to be a stable church. We want to continue to, because we know that's what's going to be the kind of church that can reach an unstable world. And so we know people are looking for stability. Please, Lord, let them be able to look to us to receive that. And we look forward to this coming Sunday, Lord, when we have so many things we get to do in our church. Please bless those activities. Please bless our choir practice now. And please, Lord, bless this church for your glory and take us home safe so we can be about serving you again if you give us another day. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Good night.